Hello to everyone and welcome to the third of our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion sessions. The first two were around disability and Black and minority ethnic issues, and this one is everything you wanted to know about LGB, but we're afraid to ask, lesbian, bisexual and gay. Could you go on to the next slide, Jodie, please? Thanks. Now, a few kind of housekeeping rules that we've asked people to do to make sure that people join as soon as they can. If you've got any other apps or devices, certainly things that give your screen, don't they? So if you could turn those devices off, that would be great. And when you're listening, if you just keep your mic muted, most people have turned the cameras off, and as well, that just helps us with connectivity and kind of make sure that we can actually hear what's going on as well. Can you move on to the next one? Thanks. Great. Now, all of these speeches have started with some important quotes from people. Now, one of the things you'll notice here, this is the last time we had somebody in the White House who actually spoke in full sentences and made things make sense. Now, I've substituted one word in this quote, which I've substituted people for Americans. But what Obama said very clearly was when all people are treated as equal, no matter who they are or whom they love, we are all more free. So he's making that connection between if we treat one group of people in a discriminatory way, that has an impact on absolutely everybody. And that's certainly been the case with LGBT people in the past. So next slide. And this is from a guy, Vineet Mehta, who works alongside Stonewall, which is a national organization representing people and in the bisexual people experience homophobia that gay and lesbian people face, along with biphobia. And I think that's something maybe that we'll bring out in this session when we talk to Lois. About sometimes bisexuals get it in the neck from both sides, so people see them as same-sex partners and maybe raise issues around that, but also sometimes within the LGB community, they're not necessarily given the same rights, I suppose, as other LGB people, particularly when they have got an interest in partners of the opposite gender. Okay, next one. Okay, and this is from one of the very first kind of national American sports people who came out. And of course, that's always seen as a big risky thing to do in quite kind of masculine sports. I believe he was in baseball. And it's one of the things I believe in, and I live my life by this, that openness may not completely disarm prejudice, but it's a good place to start. So I think the more honest and open you can be, and I think that's a quote that comes from Stonewall as well, if you can be yourself truly at work, you can work better as well. That's absolutely the case. I think the more open we can be about ourselves, the more I think allows people to ask us questions and kind of disarm some of the prejudice that people have. Okay, and finally, it wouldn't be me if it wasn't to include in some kind of humor in here. So that last quote, Jodie. This is from, I don't know if anybody remembers the sitcom Ellen, but when Ellen came out, and I think she was the very first kind of nationally transmitted comedy program in the US to have a lead character that was lesbian or gay, she came out in that as a, also she came out herself. Unless you were playing Catwoman. So I think, you know, the other thing that I think is really important is that we deal with issues with sense of humor and with a sense of self, and that we are kind to each other. So no question is a bad question. We've had quite a lot of questions that I'm going to ask our speakers about. But I think if you've got any questions during this, there's an opportunity to use the Slido, and I'll kind of give you that next if you put the next slide up. Okay, we've got two speakers today. Mark Ellergby-Hedley, who's a sexual health improvement practitioner who works for Newcastle upon Tyne Trust, and Lois Wilkinson, who works for the Trust here in Northumbria, who's a Freedom of Information Officer. Now, if you've got any questions that you want to ask them during the presentation, you can use Slido, and that's hashtag 111. If you've got any difficulties with that, you can also use the chat function, and we'll try and keep an eye on questions coming in there. But a lot of what we're going to be doing is going to be based on questions that people have already asked us, and that's great. If you use that link that Tracy's put on the chat function, that will be easy to use that. Okay, and the next slide. Right, so for many of you, you'll have seen lots of different acronyms used around LGB, LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQI, LGBTQIP and plus. It can be quite confusing for people. Now, that just represents, I suppose, that the kind of variety of identities that people have that aren't by what we wanted to do to give proper attention to issues around trans people, partly because a lot of the questions I get asked are related to trans issues, and I think that deserves to have a session all on its own. So what we will do next year is we're going to get some speakers in to come and talk to us about trans issues, because that's something that we face as practitioners, that we face as individuals, that people have maybe a lot of questions about. So for this session, I just wanted to concentrate on LGB. So without further ado, if you want to go on to the next slide, Jodie, I'm going to pass over to Mark and Lois. I don't know if Lois is on the call yet, but she is going to be joining us as soon as possible. But the first question that I've got, Mark, I'll pass over to you first, if that's okay. A lot of people asked us about kind of like when did you come out of work, and when is it a safe time to come out, and kind of what was your experience? So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of coming out.
Yeah, okay. Well, I came out at work and in my personal life a lot longer after I kind of knew myself that I was a gay guy. So for me, I was around 10 years old when I started to feel as though I was a little bit different from my friends at school. And obviously my age, lots of my friends were into Charlie's Angels and kind of fancied Charlie's Angels. I was more into Magnum PI and the and to my male friends at school, and all the way through my teenage years in secondary school, I began to understand what those feelings were, and actually it was because I was gay, and it was probably around the age of 12 and 13 when I realised that I was gay, and that was just the way it was. And for me, I was fine with that. But my experiences at school were very difficult because of the bullying that I received. Even though I wasn't out at school, people assumed because I was into certain music and I didn't have girlfriends, and my best friend at school was really quite effeminate, and they assumed he was gay. So then obviously I must be gay as well because I was his best mate. Kind of going through secondary school and then starting work at 16 for a retail company called QuickSave, I decided that I wasn't going to come out at all because of my experiences at school. So for the first few years of me working at QuickSave, I hid who I actually was because I was afraid of what might happen. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s and I'd actually met somebody who I kind of fell in love with, and I wanted to start talking to people and letting people know how I was feeling. And I actually felt kind of me for the first time. So initially I told a couple of family members. So it was my auntie, who was only 5 years older than me, and my sister, who was just kind of the I suppose the support I got from both of those was absolutely brilliant. And that gave me the confidence to then start to talk to work colleagues. And by this time in my early 20s, I was managing the QuickSave stores. So I initially spoke to a few staff that I was managing in the stores, and the support that I got was great there. But in the meantime, my dad found out I was gay. And he disowned me, didn't want anything to do with me, and I was going through quite a difficult time around kind of just how I was feeling about the way that my dad had reacted, and that was starting to affect my work. and eventually my senior managers found out at QuickSave, and even though people in the workplace were great, so the people I was working with on a day-to-day basis were great, all the area managers, the regional managers were all male, and they made my life hell. And it was a really, really difficult place to work, because of not only the way that they related to me on a day-to-day basis and how difficult they made my life. It was difficult for me to deal with on a personal level as well. And it got so bad at that time that I ended up leaving the job I worked at, and I felt as though I was pushed out more than me making the decision to leave myself. I just felt, because of the lack of support and the way that the senior management had dealt with the situation and on a day-to-day basis was speaking to me, because it was all very underhand, and it was comments, and it was I suppose it was kind of low-level bullying. Nobody really said anything in particular, but it was just the way that they were and how they reacted to coming into the stores where I was working. I ended up having to leave and look for a job elsewhere. So the initial period of that coming out at work was great on the level of me getting support from the people I was managing on a day-to-day basis. But the senior level support was just absolutely horrendous. So much so that I ended up leaving QuickSave and looking for a job somewhere else.
Okay, so Lois, I noticed Lois has joined the call there. Lois, we were just asking Mark about his experience of coming out and when he knew and when he felt it was safe to come out and come out at work. I wonder what your experience has been like.
In terms of, I've not kind of had any, adverse kind of comments or anything from anybody. But it's worth noting as well that, it's until kind of more recently, it has just been a very small group of people at work who know or who that I would speak to about it. It's mainly just kind of for fear of, wondering like that people might start asking you questions, and sometimes it's feeling that it's easier just not saying it, which now I'm starting to kind of like become a little bit more kind of, confident in thinking, I should be able to talk about it.
Brilliant. Okay. So one of the other questions that people asked was around kind of when you were looking for a job or when you were looking for a particular position, did you look to see what kind of reputation the organisation had around LGBT issues at all, Lois? I don't know if you want to answer that first, and then we'll go back to Mark.
Yeah, I think in terms of my first job, I worked in retail, and I wasn't out at that point.
Yeah.
When I joined the trust, I'd already kind of, through experience of working with them from 2013, I'd already had experience in terms of like the and diversity opportunity culture that was at Northumbria. So when I returned to work at the trust in 2018, I left from working at North Tyneside Council, and I already kind of knew and felt comfortable that I was going back into an organisation which not only was familiar because I already worked here before, but knew that the trust had, really good values in terms of E&D and inclusion, and also like with networks as well.
Brilliant. Okay, Mark, how about you? So when you said you had to leave your previous job because of that kind of bullying, what was the next step for you?
It was, I suppose, just to find another job. So I didn't really look into it in too much detail, and it was in 1990 when I left QuickSave and was looking for another job, and the job that I got was with Texas Home Care, which is now Sainsbury's Home Base, and I didn't actually look to see what their policies were or if they were kind of supportive in any way around LGBT issues. I'm sure at the time, back in 1990, they probably had nothing in place for any members of staff that identified as LGBT. But my experience when I did come out within that workplace, which I suppose in a way you might expect it to be similar to kind of what I experienced at QuickSave, with it being a DIY store. But actually they were really supportive. It wasn't an issue. The staff were great. The management were great. So yeah, I didn't have any problems there. And when I left there, because I was made redundant when it changed from Texas Home Care to Sainsbury's Home Base, they had to get rid of quite a few staff, and I was one of the ones that was made redundant. So I got a job at Aldi, and actually around sexual orientation. Eventually, I came out early on with my staff because I was managing Aldi stores, and they were absolutely brilliant. And myself and my partner were invited to get-togethers, and if people were having nights out, we were both invited, and that was great. And eventually, when I came out to the senior management at Aldi, they were all fine as well. Around my sexual orientation, it wasn't an issue. And moving on from that, the job I got after that was at Mesmac North East, and if they weren't going to be supportive around my sexual orientation, then nobody was going to be.
No, exactly. So, and for people who don't know what Mesmac is, do you want to tell them?
Yeah, so Mesmac, when I joined in 2001, it was a service that was across the North East, and it was a service that supported gay and bisexual men. So it was they had an office in Newcastle, they had an office in Middlesbrough, and they supported all areas of the North East. So anybody who identified as gay or bisexual, or a gay or bisexual man, or anybody that was questioning their sexual orientation, could access support from Mesmac North East. And an organisation that exists are only now residents, and they're part of Newcastle City Council, so they're part of the local authority. Okay,
so we've had a couple of questions that have come in from Slido that'd be really good to answer. One specifically for Lois, and one that both of you could answer. So if we start with the one that came in for Lois. Lois, people are asking what the most frequent inaccurate assumptions made about bisexuality.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's just a wide range of different misconceptions that people have about people who are bisexual. Some of them are that you're somewhat of an outsider, and that's both in wider society and also can be within the LGBT community as well. You're kind of seen as you're neither here nor there, you know, or as what some people I've heard people say is you're either half gay or you're half straight. There's not kind of like a middle where, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, you can hear from people. And this kind of like adds to people kind of feeling that, you know, that they're a little bit invisible as well, and, you know, that somehow, you know, their identification isn't valid. And as I said, disappointingly, that is also within, you know, a community where you should feel that, you know, you're accepted. And as well, you often get, you know, that people are asking, you know, is it not just an experimental phase? You know, is this temporary? You know, if somebody's been in a relationship, say with a woman most of their life, and then leave that relationship and the next relationship is with a man, you can hear comments like, oh, so that person's straight now. And it's like, no, it's still a bisexual relationship, whether you're with someone of the opposite sex or the same. There's loads of other ones. Bisexual people are untrustworthy or greedy, that they seem to kind of want relationships with everybody and everybody who moves. You know, is a
take and eat it argument. Yes, I've heard.
You know, that they're attracted to kind of everybody, and obviously it's because everybody has. And as well, you know, there's the misconceptions that people who are bisexual are secretly gay, and that they're in denial about that,
Right.
which is incorrect as well, obviously, because, you know, if somebody, you know, there's a big difference between, you know, whether you are bi or whether you are gay, and obviously they've each got their own identification, and, you know, to be told that, you know, you're kind of in denial it's another not very nice misconception that a lot of people have.
Absolutely. Okay. Oh, thank you for that. It's really good. That's really clarified things, I would guess, for a lot of people. So the other question that was being asked while on Slido here is, what can colleagues do to encourage people to be open about their sexuality at work? And I suppose it links into a question that came before the session, which is, you know, as a trust, what do you think we can do to make people feel more accepted and integrated and kind of valued? So I don't know if you want to start first, Lois, and then we'll pass over to Mark.
I think that it's really important to recognise the importance of like playing an active role in promoting equality and diversity at work. Whether you're a member of the LGBT community or not, everyone still have their place. You know, inclusiveness and a good culture. You know, one of our values is respect, and you would expect that, you know, that respect would extend to our colleagues as well, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, and that's, I suppose, another question on here that maybe if you could stay on for a while. It's about kind of a lot of people are asking, well, what is it we can do to show our support for our LGBT colleagues? What kind of things could allies do?
I think that it's important to, you know, understand and listen to people. You know, if you have, for example, you know, a trans member of staff, make sure that you make a conscious effort to, you know, address that individual by the pronoun that they wish, you know, such as, you know, they or them. You know, addressing people by their correct, you know, gender identity is really, really important. You know, it referring to people, you know, it's really personal and it's important, you know, for not just for their identity outside of work, but also for their confidence whilst they're at work. So I think it's something that's really basic, and we should all kind of, you know, promote making sure that we're addressing people correctly.
Brilliant. Okay, how about you, Mark?
I think a couple of things on top of what Lois has said. I'm not sure if, as a trust, you have signed up to the Rainbow Badge, which I think, because we now give out our rainbow lanyards to every member of staff that are new to the service, as well as those that have been kind of as part of the trust for longer. They can now have their rainbow lanyard rather than the blue and white NHS one. So what we wanted to do in Newcastle was to promote people who are happy for people to come and speak to them if they identified as LGB, or they need a safe person to speak to. Signed up to the National Rainbow Badge campaign, and if that's something that you do in North Tyneside and Northumberland, I think it's great to encourage staff to actually sign the pledge and get the badge, so that they're identifiable to people, whether it's patients or whether it's other members of staff. And I think the other thing is that don't be frightened to challenge somebody if they do say something that might, or if they're making an assumption, or if they're actually saying something outright that might be harmful, or that might be homophobic, biphobic, transphobic. You know, be confident in actually challenging that person, and don't be afraid to do that.
Okay, so in terms of kind of, because that was a question that was certainly kind of raised by people before we started the session, was around what is it that allies can do to support the LGBT colleagues? And I know that's something that Lois has answered as well. So in terms of those, have either of you ever encountered those situations where somebody's maybe said something that was either misinformed or maybe casually offensive, or whether they intended it or not? And how did you deal with that? What do you think is important in dealing with that? And what do you think is important for your colleagues to support you in doing that?
For me, I think because I'm very open about who I am, it's quite rare that anybody would say anything in front of us, certainly around being kind of lesbian, gay, bisexual. I think the time I've had to a quiet word with them is around trans issues, and it's not that it's been said in a nasty way. It is just the lack of knowledge and understanding. Lois mentioned pronouns, and also addressing somebody in the way that they want to be identified around their gender, and so it's more to do with patients that might be coming into the service that might be trans male or trans female, but might not have gone through the process of changing their gender physically, but it's how they present themselves, and it's misgendering that person, because somebody might think, oh, well, that's a man, but they're dressed as a woman, so they identify them as a man. But actually, if they're presenting as female, then you identify them as female and speak to them in that way. And it's just it's not. I suppose for me, it's not coming across too heavy-handed. It's just raising awareness of how they should do that, to make sure that they're being inclusive, and that person that they're speaking to or referring to feels as though they're being valued for who they are.
Yeah, I suppose that there's a follow-on question that somebody's asked at you, which I think is quite an important one. Is about how you feel when sexuality is asked about in organisations that complete. That it's on the form and it's on the agenda because you can actually identify, or can it feel invasive?
I think previously might have kind of interpreted it a different way as I do now. Previously, I kind of would have been thinking, oh, like, am I going to disclose it on this form? What are the reasons for disclosing it? But I think what's really important is it opened my eyes when I started attending the staff network sessions, for realizing how important it is actually to be visible and to record, your orientation on things such as the staff survey, for example, because we really need to have representation of our whole workforce. And if people aren't putting it down, then we can't really kind of see the bigger picture in terms of like how diverse our workforce is. And I think it's quite sad to think that some people would feel intimidated not to disclose their orientation. I think, like, from not personal experience, but from what I've read and from what I've heard from other people, some people say that they're really afraid of either rejection or being outed to a wider group of colleagues, and also kind of potential fears that it could jeopardize their career progression as well. I have heard people saying that they've chosen not to say so because of that.
Okay, that's interesting. So I suppose one of the things that can maybe get around that a little bit is about being very open about kind of having, say, senior leaders who are very supportive of LGBT. How important do you think that is, that you've got senior staff who are either out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans?
I think kind of for where I work within Newcastle hospitals, I've seen that. So working hospitals, we didn't have that senior management support and leadership.
Yeah.
But more recently, since Dame Jackie came into post, and Martin Wilson, who's the CEO, I mean, Martin's an out gay man and very supportive of the LGBT staff network. He's he's probably the most out person that I know in the trust, which is absolutely fantastic when you've got somebody who's at that level. So he's probably second or third in command within the trust, and he's probably the most open and out about who he is, about his partner, about speaking about it, about organising things. It's been a really good change in the way that that we kind of are doing things within Newcastle hospitals, and that's had a huge impact on more people feeling comfortable in joining up to the staff network. And we had our first Pride breakfast, obviously not this year unfortunately, but in 2019 we had our first Pride breakfast within the trust, which hundreds of people came to, and it was just absolutely fantastic. And a lot of that was because they felt they could do that because of the people that were there, and a lot of the senior management team actually attended that Pride breakfast. So it does have a huge impact when you've got that support from senior managers. Yeah.
That's great. Lois, how about you? Do you think role models are really important within the trust?
Yeah, I think, mirroring what Mark said, it's really important, not just for, staff who are LGBT and out as LGBT, but, also staff maybe who are a little unsure, they might have just started in the organisation or feeling a little reserved about, being more visible. I think it's really, really important to have your senior level staff are out there and who get involved in, wider community, events as well. We'll have like Northumberland Pride, and we'll have the partnership with the council in terms of, the promotion of that. So I think it's really important. I think it cannot be kind of, stressed enough.
No. Oh, brilliant. So, I mean, kind of a follow-on question to that really that was asked before the session was around kind of role models and kind of whether you had any role models when you were growing up. How did you find out about LGB relationships and their acceptability? What kind of sex and relationship education did you get when you were coming through school? And I guess it might be slightly different given the age differences here. I can imagine what Mark's is. But Lois.
Yeah, it's in terms of role models, kind of growing up, I think it's been having a varied kind of group of people that you sort of look up to in terms of their values and ideas. I think like from my background for studying and interest wise, a little bit nerdy, is that I'm like a bit of a history, and a lot of my kind of like heroes are the likes of like Harvey Milk, and some of the LGBT figures from history who have kind of like paved the way in terms of speaking out at a time when it was criminalized or demonized. Like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera, people who weren't afraid to kind of down and say enough's enough.
Yeah, and a really good time is actually because somebody asked a question about the Stonewall riots and about the kind of difference between the Stonewall riots and is the Stonewall organisation in the UK the same. I don't know if you want to say something about Marsha was one of the people who kicked off the Stonewall riots.
Yeah, so a number of individuals from the LGBT community were the turning point in kind of setting away in stone, the whole movement, and then everything that followed as well in terms of Pride and what we know and love and celebrate today. And it was incredibly brave members of that community faced not just verbal abuse, but there was a lot of physical abuse of the community, and in the different time period that it was as well. There was even less acceptance than there is now of the community. So if anybody gets a chance to have a read into the story in terms of with Marsha and Sylvia, they're fascinating people. We've got a lot to thank them for.
Yeah. How about you, Mark? What was your experience like when you were coming through school? And I don't know whether you got any sexual relationship education. If you're like me, you were taught by nuns and priests, and you can imagine how open they were to talking about homosexuality. But
well, certainly, kind of when I first kind of started to think that I was different from my friends, the only people that you saw on television were the likes of Daniel. Oh, sorry, hold on a second.
oh,
Sorry,
Danny LaRue, I think you were going to say.
it was Les was trying to ring us. He's obviously forgot that I'm in the middle of something. Yeah, so Danny LaRue and the likes of Larry Grayson were the only people that you would probably see on television.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was really scared that that's how I was going to be.
Okay.
Because that's the only people that you saw that were gay. In school, there was nothing. I mean, sex ed was really, really poor in school anyway. And I don't know whether I can talk about the only thing that I remember from school sex education was, I mean, the lads and lasses were split up to begin with anyway. So we never knew what female students or female friends were kind of were being informed on, or the discussions that they were having. But the only thing that I remember was it was a geography teacher that was doing sex ed in school, and he had a group of the lads in, and he and I do apologise for my language here, but he said 90% of you are wankers, and the other 10% are liars. And that's all that's all I remember. And of course, we were all kind of sat there mortified, and because you were either lying or you were with the others. So, and that's the only thing that I can remember. There was nothing else that was said that was of any worthwhile, and especially around kind of LGB relationships, there was just nothing at all that I hold on to and think, actually, this is relevant for who I am.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and I would guess, I mean, I know from speaking to a lot of, my brothers and sisters and straight friends and all the rest of it, that sexual and relationship education was never particularly good. I think it's by far better than it ever used to be now. And there's more acceptance amongst young people of difference. And, my kids it's never been an issue for them and their friends. So I wonder whether there's anything in there that you think, what the impact of not having access to being able to talk about good, healthy relationships was for a lot of gay men and bisexuals?
I think there's a huge impact for young people. If they're not, if they don't feel as they're being recognised for who they are and for kind of how they identify, then it can have huge implications, not only on how they feel about themselves, but also about how their friends, their fellow students are going to feel about them as individuals as well. Because if it's not discussed, then it's either deemed invisible or it's deemed actually not relevant. It's not a worthwhile relationship, or kind of your sexual orientation isn't normal, or however it might be judged. Those are the feelings, and those are the kind of I suppose the things that those young people are going to think about and how they're going to feel about themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's quite a lot of somebody here said one of her son's friends came out at school at 14 and 15, and his friends bought a rainbow cake which they shared out amongst all of their classmates. So hopefully that's kind of more prevalent than we think. But I suppose it leads on to another question that people asks, which is about kind of, we've all got equal rights now. Should we not all be treated the same? What's the issue for lesbians, gays, bisexuals? We've got the Equality Act. You can get married to your same-sex partner. Do we really need to talk about it? What's the issues? So if you want to start, Mark, and then maybe Lois, if you want to kind of pitch in.
Yeah, I think we might have kind of the opportunity to get married, to have civil partnerships, to have our relationships recognised. But I wouldn't feel safe walking down Northumberland Street holding my partner's hand, especially being a guy in his 50s and my partner's 5 years older than me. It would invite those people that did have a bias or that were homophobic just to come up and either say something or be physical, or it's the worry that would happen. So in one sense, yeah, you do have similar rights as anybody else, but actually it's what you feel able to do and what you can do and feel safe in doing so. So for me, yeah, we might have equal rights, but we still don't have the opportunity to express ourselves in the same way as lots of other people do.
Yeah. Okay, Lois, how about you?
I think I agree with Mark as well, especially his last comment there in terms of not being able to kind of express. It's more times than anything that would have been said in terms of a straight relationship or a straight person, would you hear remarks such as like, oh, you need to like just tone it down a little bit, like don't be so kind of out there, and it's ridiculous trying to ask someone to tone down who they are, and that would never get asked of a person who was straight, or stop holding hands, like I don't want to see that, or no one wants to see a man and a woman kissing, like that you do get comments like that. And I think that the stigmas and the stereotypes are really deep rooted, and unfortunately there's still those stereotypes are kind of perpetuated by even like the media. There'll be in news stories, there'll be kind of undertones there. Films and TV programs, they're still kind of the stereotypes are still being filtered through to people. So it kind of reinforces, that, as Mark said, yes, you have, you have the rights to, this and this, but you're not quite still equal as, this couple, for example. And I think that has problems as well in terms of, young people, are talking about sex education in terms of young people accessing services as well. If they feel different or invalid, or made to feel ashamed of their sexuality, it can actually impact their access to healthcare services as well. So I think it's definitely still really, really vital that we still have things like Pride, and we still talk about these issues, because they're not kind of going to go away anytime soon.
No, absolutely, yeah. So another couple of questions are asked before we kind of finish out. But somebody had asked they'd heard about how many advances have been made in HIV treatment and care, but they wanted to find out a little bit more about that and say, well, even if that's the case, how does that affect people's day-to-day life? And I suppose in some ways that links back to what we were talking about with sex and relationship education, and maybe having a lack of information given specifically around the not the mechanics, but the risks and the kind of benefits of same-sex partnerships. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, well, I'm quite open, not only about my sexual orientation, but also about my HIV status.
Yeah.
I've been HIV positive, or I've been diagnosed since 1998, and I was really fortunate when I was diagnosed that the treatment that we have now, which is people call it combination therapy, so it's usually a combination of different drugs that are able to kind of attack the virus in different ways to stop it different things that the medication does. And I was lucky that had been available for a couple of years previous to me being diagnosed. At the time, the treatment was absolutely horrendous in the, I suppose, the side effects that people experienced when they were on medication. For me, when I went on medication in November of 1998, I was taking 8 tablets a day, which was a lot less than people had been taking previous. But I had to take all my meds on an empty stomach. So getting up in the morning and having to take my first 3 tablets, and knowing that the feeling that was going to give me would be like having the worst hangover you can ever imagine. And
Right.
knowing that every day when you got up, you felt well, but then took your medication, and that was how it was going to make you feel for the next couple of hours until you could actually have something to eat and kind of and settle your stomach down a little bit. It had a huge impact on my life at that time, and it took me about 3 months to get used to that medication. And because of that, working as a supermarket manager at Aldi, I had to tell them why I was going to be off work for possibly 3 months until the meds or until my body got used to the medication. And initially, even though that seemed to go well, Aldi showed their true colours about 6 months later and actually stopped me from coming back to work. They wouldn't allow me back to work, so effectively I lost my job for being HIV positive, which was a really difficult time in my life. Not only was I dealing with my new HIV status, but I was also having to deal with the fact that I didn't have a job anymore and I was going to have to find work somewhere else. As far as medication's concerned, over the years, things have got much, much better. I got to a period of time about 4 years ago when I was only taking 1 tablet a day, which was absolutely fantastic. And I wasn't getting any particular side effects day to day, so I was able to kind of manage absolutely fine. But what I was finding with that 1 tablet a day regime was that it was affecting my kidneys,
Right.
which meant eventually I had to stop taking that 1, and now I take 2 tablets a day. And it's a similar regime, but without the effect of it damaging my kidneys. So now I'm kind of fine. I take my night before I go to bed, which means I don't forget. And any slight side effects that I do have, I get while I'm asleep. So I can get up on a morning and feel absolutely fine and do what anybody else would do. So that side of things have improved hugely over the last 20 years, 25 years. As far as education, one of the roles that I have is I do go into a lot of schools in the Newcastle area and do HIV awareness. And again, I disclose my status during the sessions I do in schools, so that young people can ask questions about what it's actually like to live with HIV. And I've never in the it'll be about 17, 18 years now that I've been going into schools talking about HIV. I've never had 1 negative reaction from a young person in school.
That's reassuring.
It's brilliant, and all the questions have been really, really supportive and really sensible questions. And their level of knowledge has increased over the years. So I always used to go and do a quiz around routes of transmission, and you got to a stage where you were going in and doing the same quiz with the same questions, and young people were rolling their eyes. But they were thinking, why the heck are you asking me that? You know, of course you're not going to get HIV that way. So I've had to change what I do as I go into schools, because their level of knowledge is increasing. And they look at you as though you think they're stupid because you're asking questions or kind of saying a particular route of transmission isn't a way of getting HIV, because a lot of them know that information now. So it's great to see that young people's knowledge and young people's respect and compassion is absolutely brilliant in schools nowadays. So
yeah, I think we underestimate young people and their kind of attitudes and their beliefs as well. I think that's the case. I remember talking to my kids about kind of whether it had been an issue for them going to school and knowing that they had gay parents, and they just rolled their eyes at me and went, God, no, people are more bothered by the fact that we've been brought up with vegetarians. They got more of a hard time around that. So that was a reassuring thing for me. So I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time. I really appreciate your honesty around that, Mark, and other people are saying that as well. So I wonder, the kind of couple of things that I wanted to ask you for advice and kind of tips about, and if say somebody in the workplace was thinking about coming out, what kind of advice would you give them? If we start with you, Mark, and then we'll ask Lois.
I think it kind of what I've been finding quite a lot recently is people just want to have a chat with somebody. So kind of the staff network is ideal, because if somebody's kind of thinking about coming out in the workplace, they know they can speak to somebody within the LGBT staff network that already is out, so they can ask what their experiences have been in the workplace, and kind of how they can go about doing that, and joining the staff network is a good step in that direction. You know, actually getting to know some people who are already out, so you've got a bit of a support group around you, and then finding out a little bit more about what your organisation does around supporting LGBT people. So looking at the policies, procedures, looking at how kind of the senior management value the staff networks and things like that. I think that's an initial way of doing it, and then you know that you've got the support and you've got the about how you organise come out.
Sure. Okay, that's great. How about you, Lois? Any tips you can give us?
I think it's important to make sure that you don't feel pressured to come out if you don't want to. I think that there's, sometimes a misunderstanding that, everybody, who is LGBT is comfortable with being out at work. Sometimes it's their choice not to be. And their choice might not be through, fear of any discrimination or anything. It might just be that they want to keep that outside of work. They want to keep it separate or personal in terms of their personal life and relationships. And I think it's important to respect those people who have made a decision not to come out as well. In terms of support for staff members, I think what Mark had said about the networks is a really, really good point, in terms of making contact with other staff members who can share their experience, and sometimes that can be enough to make you feel at ease in terms of how to start those conversations. I think talking to a trusted colleague or a friend is probably the best way that I would go about it. Talking to somebody who you know very well, and they're not going to kind of take a piece of information that you've disclosed to them and just go running with it and saying, oh, by the way, did you know that? Yeah, because it's not yours to share. So that's important to remember as well, is not to kind of share and out to people if they haven't said that they're comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, and I know somebody's asked a question on the chat box there about whether we can give confidential advice, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the trust we've got equality, diversity email that only I can see, and one colleague to ask any question, that's absolutely fine. And the network, again, that it's really important that people understand, like what Lois was saying, that the information is shared there, stays there. But we've also got some really good support from senior members of staff. So our exec director of HR and OD, Anne Stringer, is our champion at the exec level as well, and she comes along to the network on occasions by invite. Yeah, so that's really good tips. Thank you very much. So just for information for people who don't know about the network, and I'm sure the same as the case in Newcastle, it isn't necessarily solely for people who identify as LGBT or any of the other acronyms. And I know that's a question that somebody's asked about all of the different letters that you see associated with LGBT, Q, I, P and A, I think are the ones that have come up there. I would always say, don't worry so much about the acronyms and just remember that there's a person at the other end of that conversation. Yeah. That just represents, I think, of identities that people are kind of starting to identify now, and it becomes very specific sometimes. But I think the most important thing is to remember that these are all people who have the same feelings, the same experiences, want the same types of relationships and kind of opportunities as everybody else as well. So I think we're probably coming to an end. I don't know if there's any kind of last words you want to impart, Lois, and then I'll ask Mark the same as well.
And just thank you everybody for joining today. I think it's been really positive to, you know, sort of hear some questions and, you know, share some, you know, experiences and some advice. I think that this trust is it's a really good trust to work for. You know, that equality and diversity is, you know, it's really taken seriously, and, you know, I've always felt kind of very comfortable in working here and in terms of support. And just, I would encourage anybody, as Patrick had said, like, you know, even those who don't identify as LGBT, if you're an ally or you want to get involved in supporting, I think it's really important to attend the staff network meetings. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Mark, how about you? Any final words of wisdom?
Just to echo what Lois has said, it's fantastic that there's so many people actually joined this session, and it's really encouraging to know that there's lots of people out there that want to increase their knowledge and want to understand a little bit more, so they maybe support friends, family, colleagues in the best way that they can. And again, I think the staff networks are a great introduction, and I think allies are really important, because if LGBT people allies, they're part of the network, that just makes it feel a safer place to work, I think, because they know that it's not just people who identify as LGBT are actually accessing the networks, it's other people that just want to be supportive.
Yeah, that's a really good point, I think. And I think we've got 7 networks running throughout the trust. We run them jointly with the Northumberland Council. And just to say to people, if you're interested in equality diversity work and being part of the change that we all really want to see, to have really positive culture in our trust, and I know Newcastle has made massive strides with Dame Jackie as well, and similarly with Sir Jim, I think this has got support from the very top. So as an out gay man myself, and kind of having been out since I even came to work, I think it's really important to feel that sense of belonging and acceptance, and that kind of you're given credit and credibility for what it is that you do. So I really want to say thank you very much to both of you. I think it's been a really, really constructive, insightful session. I'm already getting quite a lot of positive feedback through the chat box here. We'll be sending out an evaluation form to people anyway, but I want to thank everybody who's participated in this and asked questions. It's the only way you find things out, isn't it, is if you ask questions. And there is no such thing as a stupid question. And I think, Mark, you know, your experience in school is really it gives me hope for the future. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you everybody for participating, and we look forward to getting your feedback. We could always do things better, but I thank the both speakers who've been absolutely excellent. We'll be sending you a little token of our appreciation. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.